in the session, lawmakers and advocates promoted a comprehensive bill that would increase the number of teachers of color and American Indian teachers in Minnesota's schools.
Breaking down the barriers for people of color and American Indians to become teachers is an important part of fostering a productive, inclusive environment. And I know that from being a new teacher those many years ago, that the mentorship of a wonderful, wonderful woman, a woman of color, her name was Dolores, left me with a unique perspective and skills that stayed with me all of these years and made me a better teacher and collaborator in the classroom and in my life. We know that when our educators reflect the diversity of our students, we will truly be much more successful in narrowing our persistent achievement and opportunity gaps that are among the worst in the country.
As somebody that was adopted, I was born in Columbia. And somebody that was adopted, I grew up in kind of a suburban middle-class family, and I didn't really connect with my ethnicity like many students of color. They never see a teacher of color, a lot of them, throughout their whole educational career. And so I think it's important. And when I got to the legislature, I was able to kind of identify with some issues that I hadn't when I was growing up. And as we look at the tight labor markets, we recognize that new Americans are also an important factor in our economic prosperity and filling our workforce shortage.
This bill addresses barriers with both policy and appropriations, and it sets a clear path to attract, prepare, and help candidates complete their programs through marketing, grants, and scholarships. It focuses on meaningful methods of retention like mentoring and affinity group support. And it provides districts with the ability to attain and support their educators in becoming or remaining teachers, and also higher education programs to support pre-service teachers of color.
As is our responsibility, we advise that the state meet its duty to provide all students with equitable access to effective and diverse teachers who reflect the diversity of students in their district per 2016 adopted state law.
Now joining me to talk about efforts to recruit more American Indian teachers and teachers of color is the author of the Senate bill, Senator Patricia Torres-Ray. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
One of the findings of the most recent Minnesota Teacher Supply and Demand Report is that the percentage of teachers of color remains stagnant while the percentage of students of color continues to grow in Minnesota. So briefly, what does this bill do?
So this bill really is a comprehensive effort that was developed by a large coalition of educators, experts, activists, students, parents who came together, about 1,200 people, to really talk about what is that we need to do in the short and the long term. So input was gathered around the state of Minnesota. And we concluded that in reality, what we've done over the last 10 years to recruit teachers of color has been inadequate, very small steps that are underfunded, and that we needed a more comprehensive, aggressive approach. So this is a request for $85 million to really have a greater impact to address several components that need to be addressed under one bill. And so the most important thing is that we have a path to increase teachers of color by 2% every year. And we are providing the incentives and the direction on how to do that. And so we are proposing the expansion of existing programs that we currently fund inadequately, like the Grow Your Own pathways. We have intro to teaching programs that are already in place but don't receive enough funding, expand resources for increasing the number of American Indian teachers, the urban teaching programs. So we have several programs that have been put in place over the years, but they don't receive sufficient funding to increase the volume and the number of students.
And so these programs then would be targeted at young students who are maybe potentially just getting started in their careers to kind of direct them into the teaching field?
Exactly. So these programs actually were put in place to do that, to recruit, even in high schools, and to promote the teaching profession, to talk about, the specific programs that exist in different universities, and, educating students and creating awareness about the need that we have.
But due to the underfunding, it's just not pulling in enough students to really address the fact. I think I read 4% of the state's 64,000 teachers are teachers of color, American Indian, while a third of the student population are people of color. So if the idea is then if there's more funding to really get these kids passionate about this field of work, that could really be a step forward?
It's one step. Right? Because we, as you can imagine, it's very difficult to convince a young person when the economy is doing so well that there are so many options for jobs that pay a lot better than being a teacher. Is a very difficult profession. So what we're trying to do is those programs that are established already, that are doing the work, that have the connection with the different communities, that they will get more funding. The other thing that we are doing is that we are providing grants, and we're making sure that we will have a very large, almost 50% of this funding will be provided for scholarships, because that's another incentive that we need to provide. Other careers are doing this, you know, engineering, social work, a lot of professions are providing incentives so that you will get funding, that you will get scholarships in order to attend colleges.
Which is really an enticement. When you don't have to pay tuition, then you might actually stay and study and work hard. If you don't mind, I'd like to turn to the concept of mentoring, because it was mentioned by more than one person in the press conference. There's funding in here to get school districts to really focus on mentoring, which teachers are very busy, but several people spoke of how important that is. Why is mentoring so important?
It's so important because we're making a little difference in terms of recruiting and bringing people to the profession. And then they obtain their license, they come to the classroom, and they leave. So that is one of the most challenging problems that we're facing right now. A report came out from Minneapolis that actually tracked those numbers in terms of the people who are entering the profession and the very few that actually stay. And so we lose most of the teachers that come to teach in the first 3 years. So what we find particularly from teachers of color is that they're recruited because they bring these different perspectives. They bring this background, they bring connections with the communities to a system that is so disconnected, that really don't know how to tap into this great opportunity that these teachers bring. And so they get very frustrated. They feel like they don't fit into the system, that they are not appreciated, and so they leave very quickly. So what we're trying to do is figure out how do we find these teachers that have stayed in the system, that have gone through this learning process and have adapted, you know, kind of their curriculums, have adapted some of the, you know, community relations that they have to the community connections within the schools, to work with students. How have they done this and be successful and stayed in the teaching profession for a long time? These veterans that know how to do that. So
and
we
then
want to do that.
teach these new teachers those skills that they need to stick it out until they get that body of knowledge that they need to keep going.
Exactly. And this is a problem for, you know, all teachers really in general, these young teachers that come in, because Minnesota doesn't have an induction system. So teachers just come to the classroom and we say,
kind of
bless
thrown
you.
to the wolves. Yes, it's true. You know, as I read the bill, there are certain words that popped out in terms of work environment and also the environment for students and families. Words like inclusive and respectful and diverse. At a recent committee, there was discussion of teacher licensure changes in a 5-star rating system. And you spoke up and you said the underlying elephant in the room is that communities of color don't trust the state education system. Do you believe that there are components of this bill that will help those communities better engage with their educational system?
Absolutely. You know, we hear quite often from young students of color who say, we have never been in a classroom with a teacher that reflects who we are, you know, who shares with us our experiences in the community growing up, racially, ethnically, that don't speak our language. That connection for a young person is incredibly important, especially today when we have very diverse, you know, classrooms. We have students who come from, you know, different parts of the world, where they need to find that they can connect with these teachers, that they can really speak about their experiences, not just academically, because we know that if you feel well, that if you feel welcome, that if you feel appreciated, you're likely to have a conversation with a teacher about issues that are impacting your ability to learn and advance academically. It is very important, and we know that from research. Kids need to find a person that they can relate to in a position of authority. And also, this is not just for children of color, it's also for white children. You know, there was a report that came out recently that actually our lieutenant governor talks about, that people actually thought that Native people were extinct, that we don't have people of color, that we don't have Native people in the country anymore. It's just like, what? You know, imagine a child not understanding really our heritage, and in Minnesota in particular, you know, 11 tribal strong reservations that really are part of the fabric of our community. Our white children need to know that history and appreciate that history. And they know it by, you know, relating to people, knowing people in these communities. So it is incredibly important that also white children are connected to the experiences of people of color and their classmates, because they see their classmates, but they don't see a person that in positions of authority from those communities. And I think that's a significant problem in Minnesota.
Senator Torres-Way, we have to stop there, but I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you.